Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retrospective look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapter 1 of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. I don't know if you guys noticed, but that musical intro this time around was a lot shorter last time. I don't know how I didn't notice this before I put the episode up, but I went back and listened to it, and that intro was 30 seconds long. Which is ridiculous. There was no need for it to be that long, so I cut it down. The outro music is going to be a lot shorter too, in case, eventually I'm going to put out more of these and people might want to listen to them back to back. So I figured that would be a nice little convenience. You don't have to go in and manually change the episode. Just let it autoplay. So there's not really any news this week. Get used to hearing that. I'm probably not going to go out of my way to say it every single time. But in lieu of news, I'm going to talk about a few things that I wanted to expand on from last time, a few minor corrections and a disclaimer. The disclaimer being, any advice that I give here on this podcast is going to be heavily subjective. It's going to be based on information that I feel is reliable, and, I'm never going to give you bad advice, obviously, on purpose. But, I don't play efficiently a lot of the time. I use bad units. I use units that I like, even though they're not, good. So, even when I think I might be giving good advice, it might not necessarily be advice that I put into practice myself. Make sure you take anything you hear here with a grain of salt, because, I could just be wrong. If you ever hear me say something and you think, I don't know if that's right, it's probably not. I might just be talking out of my ass. In which case, feel free to leave a comment and disagree with me. We could talk about it a little bit. Engage in some discourse. Last episode, I referred to someone named Eris a few times, and there's no one named Eris in this game. There's Ares, but a few of you thought that I was talking about him, but no, I meant Aaron. Aaron from Gen 1, the Pegasus Knight, I was talking about. Although now that I'm thinking about it, because the context was that I was talking about giving Eris the Brave Lance. So now I'm thinking about Ares with the Brave Lance. I don't think he can even use it until he promotes, but it could be interesting. I don't see him needing anything besides Mistletoe, but I guess it's a possibility. Last episode, I didn't really talk about Lex as much as I probably should have. All I said really was that I liked him, but that I probably wasn't going to use him. I should make it clear that he's a very good unit, especially once he gets the Brave Axe in this chapter. He goes off really hard. But before that, it's kind of shaky. He can deal a lot of damage, he's pretty tanky, but he doesn't deal with mages well. But he's on a horse, and at the end of the day, that's really 90% of what matters in FE4 is, are you on a horse? Do you have decent skills? Which he does. He has Paragon, which is nice. Passes it on to kids. Lex is like a great father. Other than the fact that he cannot pass down items to kids, he is a fantastic father. Paragon is just a really nice skill for anyone to have. Vantage is like kind of mid, but it's still cool, I guess. Pairs well with like Wrath, I guess, if you want to do like a meme build with that. And then finally, if you've read the title of the last episode, you'll know that I did not talk about Midir. I forgot about Midir entirely, so I'll talk about him real quick right now. He's good, gameplay-wise. He is on a horse again. That's really all that matters, but he gets good weapons. There's no other mounted bow users until Lachesis promotes, so he gets pretty much exclusive access unless you want to go out of your way to use Champ or Bridget, because they're the only ones who get good, who they're the only other ones who can use bows. So, and then Bridget has the Ufel, which is all she'll ever need. So it's basically just Jamk. So if you don't care about using Jamk, you can give him the Killer Bow. You can give him, eventually, if he marries Aideen, he'll get the Brave Bow. Even if Jamk marries Aideen, you could probably just give him the Brave Bow anyway. And then just give it back to Jamk so he can pass it down to Lester. The Silver Bow, stuff like that. Really anything that you could want. And bows aren't super good in Fire Emblem in general. That's a recurring theme you're going to see, but in this game it's fine. Brave weapons are just nice in general, and there are a few chapters where you fight flying enemies. In Chapter 4, there's a lot of Pegasus Knights. There's also a lot of mages that, just go down in 2 hits from a brave weapon, so you doesn't have to worry about counterattack, which is really nice. In general, being able to attack from a distance is pretty alright. FE4 it treats bow users better than a lot of other games. That's for sure. It's like you can split Fire Emblem games down a line, games that treat bow users well and games that treat them not well at all. And this is a game that is kind of in the middle, but leaning more towards treating them well. And with all that out of the way, I think we can go ahead and get started with the chapter of the week, which is Chapter 1, Maiden of the Spirit Forest. So this chapter starts off, and it immediately addresses a question that I had at the beginning of last episode, which was, why do the people of Granvale refer to the people of Verdane as savages and barbarians and stuff like that? And there are a few reasons that I gave. The big one was mostly headcanon, but my idea was that maybe it's because they don't associate with the Crusader, and that's such a big part of Granvale's culture. But this kind of throws that into the garbage, because it immediately gives an answer, which is just that Verdane had a history of attacking Granvale, and they gained a reputation as being savage and vicious, and it seems pretty well earned in that scenario. So my ideas did not pan out, but that's fine. I'm glad that I have an answer, because I didn't actually remember that it addressed it at all. I do have to wonder, because in the opening narration it describes that once the new king, the current king of Verdane, Loptyr, took the throne, he kind of put a stop to that. But yet they still refer to the Verdanites as barbarians and savages, even though he's in power. So I don't know how recently this was. The game never explains that, and that's fair. That's fine. It doesn't have to go into detail about everything. It's still food for thought. Depending on how long he's been in power, it's possible that these are just long-standing grievances that have really should have been put to bed a long time ago, but just have not, for fairly justifiable reasons. I mean, that's not something that's easy to just let slide. Now, the other thing, and this was something I mentioned, I said this as a throwaway kind of joke, half joke last time, about the fact that, maybe Kaga is the game designer of this game, Shozo Kaga. I said that maybe he just had some questionable values, and that was showing through here. And I didn't really mean that with any level of sincerity, but out of curiosity, and just by coincidence, actually, I came across a snippet of an interview that he did with some group. I don't remember. If you want to look at it yourself and then find out some of the details and context, just put into Google Kaga interview genealogy countries. That's what I put in to find this. And there's some interesting stuff in here that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to read you the quote that is relevant here. And again, I encourage you to go look at the interview, both because it's a good interview and it addresses a lot of interesting things outside of this that I think are genuinely very fascinating about the game design of FE4. But just also to make sure that I'm not taking this out of context, because that's literally what I'm doing. But you take my word for it that the context is it's not giving him a pass or anything like that. So what he says is, while Verdane was based on barbarian nations such as Persia, there's a little note here, I assume it's a translator's note, that says, while the country Verdane in-game does take inspiration from, actually the typo here, takes inspiration from typical barbarian stereotypes, Kaga's use of the term barbarian here to refer to Persia may instead be referencing how the Greeks often used the term to refer to Persians during the Greco-Persian Wars. So this translator, again, I'm assuming it's a translator's note, seemed to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, which is fair. I don't know anything about the man personally. Obviously, I'm not going to assume his values based on one line from an interview, but I do think it's definitely questionable and made me raise an eyebrow. There's also another line from the same paragraph as the last one that is questionable as well. He says, Thracia was modeled after Spain, while Leinster in the north was modeled after Italy. That's why Leinster appears more highly civilized and polished in comparison. Again, there's nothing here to imply that he's talking about it historically, in the Middle Ages or whatever. So, I think you could read a few different things from this, but I'll be generous. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he meant historically. Again, I don't know if that's true. I'm not a historian. I also don't know that it's not true, so Someone's going to have to look into that for me and leave a comment or something. Okay, so with that tangent out of the way, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because it was relevant to some stuff I talked about last time. But into the map proper. It starts off with a visit from our friend Eldigan, who is going to be a recurring major character later on in the story. This is the first time we meet him. And he shows up and says to Sigurd, hey, well, first of all, he asks Sigurd, like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing here? Sigurd explains the situation, and Eldigan says, okay, well, the Augustria lords, which, if you look at the map, are the ones positioned, like, to the north, are kind of getting antsy, and I think they might invade you if you give them an opportunity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch your back and make sure that nothing bad happens while you're on this campaign into Verdane. And, this kind of, shows that they have a friendship here. There's also a line here that I really like because it's a good use of something that I complained about last time, which is giving exposition about, like, the relationship between characters and doing it in a really ham-fisted way. I think that this cutscene does it really well because it just it's in character and it makes sense in character and it's very well put, and I think it fits in to the conversation. It doesn't feel awkward or out of place. Sigurd says something, is like, well, hey, once this is over, I want to hang out with you again. And he says, you, me, a fine bottle of wine, just like old times. And Eldigan says, like, oh, yeah, that sounds nice. I'm looking forward to it. That's how you do that, right? Like, that's how you establish history between characters in a way that feels natural, as opposed to just expositing about, like, promises that you made each other, like, 10 years ago or whatever. It's astonishing that these two were in, like, the same, like, half-hour span of time. Oh, and poor Quan. I literally have in my notes written here, poor Quan. Quan is supposed to be the third member of their trio. Quan actually even mentions Eldigan. He's the one who brings up Eldigan last time. It's supposed to be these three. That's kind of the implication, is that they're a trio. You would not get that impression from this conversation or any conversation in the future. I don't think that Eldigan has any conversations with Quan at all. I don't think Eldigan mentions Quan in any context, and I think maybe the only time they interact is if, okay, this is a spoiler, but if you're listening to this still after the first episode, you're in it for the long haul, I guess. Eldigan comes back as a villain at some point. And you can fight him with Quan, and I think that the battle conversation they have is the only conversation that they can ever have. And, in fact, I don't actually know for a fact that they have a battle conversation. I'm going to test that out. I haven't looked into it at all, but I have to assume they do, and if they don't, that's really kind of sad, because, they're supposed to be a trio, but Quan and Eldigan barely interact with each other at all. It's kind of crazy. And after that, Eldigan goes away, and we meet Eira for the first time. Eira is we don't know who she is yet, but all we know is that she's being forced to fight because her nephew is being held captive at one of the Verdane castles, the first one that's on our road to victory here. And she kind of establishes herself as being very intimidating and very proficient, because she kind of intimidates, she basically threatens the guy holding Shannon hostage. His name is Kinboy. And she says, like, if you betray me, I'm gonna hound you to the fiery pits of hell or whatever. And he's very shaken by that, and he's a big dude, so he's like, no need for that. So he's very clearly intimidated by her, and even says something to the tune of, I wouldn't want to make an enemy out of someone with your skill with the sword or something like that. So it establishes her as a powerful person. And that's how the map starts. This is where we first gain control of our characters. And I wanna mix things up a little bit from last time, and this time I'm going to try to bounce back and forth between the story and the gameplay as it becomes relevant. So this is where we gain control of our characters for the first time, and this is where we are introduced to a few of the game mechanics that the FE4 introduced and, for the most part, never brought back. Were never brought back in a later game. You can go into the castle here. All your units start out in the castle, and you can enter into the town and do a few things here. There's a few things you can do in the castle. None of them are really relevant right now, but we'll get to them later, I guess. You can go into the town, and there's a few things you can do here. You can go to the arena, which is different from later games, because your units don't actually die here. If they drop down to 0 HP, they just get kicked out of the arena, and they're at 1 HP. So you waste a little bit of time because you have to heal them up, but otherwise there's no risk, basically, to going into the arena. It's free experience, free money, but you can't do it infinitely. Each character can only win a maximum of 7 arena battles before they're just not allowed back in anymore, per chapter. It's an interesting mechanic, and one that they never really brought back. In later games, obviously, if you lose in the arena, you're just dead. But you can do it infinitely, so it's like a higher, much higher risk for like a slightly higher reward. Honestly, I've never really been a big fan of arena grinding in later games because there's too much risk, and like I don't typically need the money or the experience. And you don't really need the money or the money maybe, but the experience probably not, unless you're doing a ranked run or something. And but because there's no risk, it's like, why not? Like, why wouldn't you do it? I've been trying to play without using speed up because I want to experience the game as close to the original way that the developers intended. I have not been succeeding in that endeavor. I think the game is just kind of slow, and I'm too tempted to use speed up. But one thing that I do solemnly swear to never do for this run is brute force through the arena, because you might experience situations in the arena where it's unlikely that you'll win, but it is possible. And with speed up, you can brute force it. You can just go through like 10, 20, 50 attempts in the arena until eventually you get it. If I face a situation where it's very unlikely that I'm going to win, and it takes me more than a few attempts to win, I'm just not going to bother. I'll try it later, or I'll just skip it. Because I don't want to abuse. I want, if you wanted to play this, if you wanted to import an SNES or a Super Famicom, I guess, and a copy of the game, that's not how you would be able to play it. So I don't think it's fair to like take that into consideration while representing this game in the context of a retrospective. Another mechanic, I don't really necessarily say it's introduced here, but this is where it becomes relevant, is the way the game handles items and gold. And this is probably, for me at least, this was the case, the biggest barrier of entry to this game, is that it takes out the trade mechanic, which has been a staple. I'm pretty sure it was in literally every other game, although in FE1, and I think FE2, it was handled very weirdly. In pretty much every game, you can have your units trade items. One person gives them an item, they give another item back. They can swap around like the order of items in the inventory to like change and equip weapon. There's none of that here. And that was a big concern for me. Also, to a lesser extent, but still, the way gold worked. There's no common gold pool. If you get gold on a character, it stays on that character, and they can only give it to their lover, or if you're a thief like Do, who we're going to meet later this chapter, they can give it to anyone, which is part of what makes thieves so good and interesting in this game. But, for the most part, 90% of the time, when you get money with a character, it's because you want money on that character. So it adds a lot of depth to, who's going to visit that village and get gold, because every village gives gold, my bad. It adds some depth to, well, do I want this character to use up their gold on this, or do I want them on something for themselves? Do I want them to buy an item or repair an item, or do I want them to give that money to their lover who can use it for something? Stuff like that. I'm beating around the bush here, but basically what I'm trying to say is I really, really like this system. I don't necessarily think I would love to see it come back. Obviously, for a remake, I want to see it come back. But in a new Fire Emblem game, I think it's maybe a little bit too obtuse for like the modern audience, and that's fine. That's not That's not me being patronizing. I'm above the modern audience. It's just It's a weird mechanic, and I don't necessarily think it's for everyone. But I think it's really cool. The way items work, again, you can't trade. The way you have to transfer items between characters is you need to sell it to a shop, and then the other character buys it for double the price that you sold it for. So it can be a good way for a character to get gold, is to get an item and then sell it to the pawn shop if that character doesn't want it. But it also adds something for your consideration when you're killing a boss that drops an item. Say that you have a boss that drops, like the boss of this chapter drops a magic ring, and obviously the only character you have right now that makes real use of that is, I guess, Dierdre, but also Azel would be the only one that I can think of that would really want it. But Azel's not really great at dealing with this boss, and even getting to him is a struggle. So you have a few options, right? You can put up with the effort of getting Azel to that boss and having him kill that boss, to get the item on him. You can kill him with Sigurd and then just leave the item on Sigurd if you don't really care about using Azel. You can sell it for gold or just have it in your inventory because you don't really care and no one else that you want to use wants it. You put up with that item being in an unoptimal place because, it doesn't matter for you. Or you can set it up in a way where you get the item on Sigurd and then you find a way to transfer it to Azel. There's a few options there, and it's I would say in general, and a common theme in strategy games in general is that inconvenience is a big catalyst for decision making, because when you're put into an unfavorable situation and none of the outcomes are great, then suddenly you have to decide which suboptimal outcome do I want. And that's interesting. And it's more interesting deciding what optimal outcome do I want. It's like like using Crom or Robin to kill an enemy in Awakening. Those are both good choices, and the choice matters insofar as both are options and both are equally as good, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But in this game, because none of the choices are good, it means that you have to weigh the pros and cons, whereas a good choice versus a good choice, there's no pros and cons there. It's just you kill the enemy and you're done with it. So I think it's interesting. And I definitely, if this is something that you were worried about getting into this game, I definitely think that you should put aside your preconceptions and just do it. And I think you'll end up really liking it. That's pretty much all the prep stuff I wanted to talk about. So once you actually start the map, there's a few things you need to consider. There's a village in the very southwest of this map, and it's difficult to get to because a brigand starts heading there immediately, and he's so close to it that there's very few ways to get there unless you're going super fast. What I ended up doing was I ended up having Sigurd go full tilt at the village, almost every single turn going his full movement along roads, and I still barely made it in time. There was a few interesting consequences of this decision. One of them was actually I almost got Sigurd killed because he ended up taking on so many enemies that his silver sword broke. From full uses, I had it repaired from last chapter. He just used it 50 times, it broke, and I ended up having to use a lance, and that, hurt his avoid a little bit. He ended up getting hit a few times, and he died, which, I did not think it was possible to get Sigurd killed, especially not in chapter 1, but you can do it, apparently. But the other interesting outcome is that I had to fight the first boss without Sigurd, which is hard. He has a hand axe, and he doesn't double, and he's not even particularly fast, so most of your units can double, but he's very bulky, and he does a lot of damage, so most of your guys are going to go down in 2 hits, and if they're damaged at all from fighting any enemies previously, then they're going to go down in 1 hit, probably. So I had to reset a few times. This game is kind of built around... I mean, I hesitate to say it's built around... It's because the maps are so big. It has an autosave feature at the beginning of every turn. You can have it save for you, and it's an unintended consequence of the maps being huge, right? Because they recognized, hey, if they get to the end of this really, really big map, and they haven't saved in a while, and they died, that's a huge inconvenience. That's hours of wasted time, potentially, for one map. So they put in this system where you can save automatically, and I mean, I don't know for a fact, but it seems like they built the rest of the game with that in mind, because there's a lot of situations in here where huge clumps of enemies will come at you. This is not the last time we will see this. I don't even think it's the first time we've seen this. And sometimes there's just no way around it. Your characters are going to face a chance of death. Unless you're playing really well, which I'm not, or if you're playing really slowly and just baiting everyone out, or if you're playing with Sigurd, which I didn't have because he was busy going down to get that village. So I had to fight the first boss. While Sigurd was heading for that village, about I want to say turn 2 or 3, you get Aideen and Du, a character named Jamp, who is the youngest prince of Verdane, is helping them out of the dungeons of Gandalf's castle. He was helping Aideen. I guess Aideen insisted that they take Du as well, because Du was a thief and he was put there for stealing, so he was just basically in jail for committing a crime, but I guess Adine, I mean, he's just a kid, so I guess Adine was like, oh, hey, we should save him too, and Jamp went along with it. Adine and Do are, well, Do is a very interesting unit. Do is a thief, and I talked a little bit about what they're capable of. Basically, they all have a class skill that lets them steal money from opponents. Most enemies in this game have like a small amount of gold on them, and when a thief attacks and connects the hit, they will steal that gold, and they can give it to anyone. They don't just have to give it to their lover. There's some interesting strategies where you can marry the thief to someone, and then that person will give them money, and then they can give that money to anyone. So it's a good idea to probably marry your thief, just for that reason alone. I don't know who. I marry him to Brigid, but I don't know if I'm gonna pair Brigid this run. Character-wise, he's not particularly interesting, and he's not good at combat. He's really only good for thief utility. If you can put up with him long enough to have him promote, then will be fine. But that's true of basically anyone. And he's a foot unit, so it's hard to find him kills. And he's not good in the arena like some of the other foot units are. So he's not great other than that thief utility. But that thief utility makes him really, really good. So definitely worth. You can't really deploy him. You deploy everyone. But it's worth finding opportunities for him to do things just for that thief utility. Character-wise, he's kind of goofy, he's kind of silly, and I enjoy some of his dialogue in this chapter, but other than that, I don't remember him being particularly interesting. Adine is our first cleric, basically. We had Ethlyn in the last chapter, but she's a troubadour, she can fight, and she's on a horse. So she's a little bit, I don't know if I would call the fighting a real benefit, but the horse is definitely a benefit that makes her better than Ethlyn, than Adine. But Adine's still good. I think she has a higher staff rank, or at the very least, she gets better staves. I know she gets a warp staff in this chapter, so that's nice. The warp staff is really nice. It was really good in this game. It's not as good as it is in some other games, but the ability to, if a foot unit is lagging behind and you want them closer to the action, you can get them across the battlefield really easily. Or if you want to teleport someone back to the home castle, you can do that as well. Although there's other ways to do that, like something that we're going to see in just a minute. Adine's character is not super interesting. There's some exposition here about why she joined the clergy that's interesting. When she shows up, Sigurd can have a conversation with her where he basically says, oh, hey, you're okay. There's a few conversations she has like that. There's one with Ethlyn, which gives Ethlyn the return staff, which is nice. And that was the way I was talking about to get characters back to the home castle, because returns them to the home castle. There's one with Azel or Midir. You have to choose one or the other, and that will give them 100 love points, which is nice. They can get married faster that way. And I think there's one. Yeah, actually, I think that's it. Yeah, but Sigurd's has some extra information, basically, because, they have a little bit of a conversation about, oh, hey, you joined the clergy because you wanted to find out answers. You wanted to pray for answers about your sister who went missing. And she's like, yeah, I want to give her birthright, the Ufel. Yeah, so this is the first we're seeing it, I guess, outside of, a village conversation. This is the first we hear of a holy weapon, so that's kind of cool. So we find out a little bit about her backstory there. She cares about her sister, and she wants to, find her and give her birthright. But outside of that, she's not a particularly interesting character. Again, a lot of the characters don't get a lot of development here because they don't have many opportunities to talk or have conversations. I could change my opinions because there are some conversations that I am forgetting about, and I will, recall as we go further into the game. I'll see them and I might change my mind on some of these characters, but these are just my initial impressions from this map and what I recall of future maps. I guess we should talk a little bit about pairing, because Adine is our first pairable mom. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically FE4 is split into two halves. Generation 1, which is what we're playing right now, and Generation 2, which picks up with the children of the characters from Generation 1. It takes place about 16 to 17 years after the events that are currently happening. And your decisions and who you choose to marry in this generation will influence the children of the next generation. Adine is a mom, and the moms will always have the same kids. So, for example, Adine will always have Lana and Lester. Those are her two children. but the dad can influence the stats, the growth rates, the skills, everything. The dad will pass down the items that you give them to the son, and the mom will pass down the items to the daughter. The money is passed down. There are some pairings where the genders are reversed. So, for example, Quan will pass down, despite being a dad, will pass down his items to his daughter, whereas Ethelyn will pass down the items to the son, Leaf. I don't want to get too much into like pairing wars in terms of what's the best. I will talk about a few of the ones that have been good for me and seem to be general consensus on like what's good. Midir is probably Aideen's most popular partner because he gives good skills and good weapons to Lester, her son, and he gets good growth rates out of it. Jamk also gets the good weapons, and I think you could argue it's maybe slightly easier to pair the two because I think they have roughly the same amount of love point conversations and same opportunities to build up love. Or maybe not, I don't know. I haven't looked into this at all, but the reason I would say it's easier is because they have similar movement, so you don't have to hold Midir back to get him to fall in love with Aideen at all, but that's never really been a concern for me, and especially if you're not trying to play fast. Like, you want to play fast a lot of the time, but then once you get to the end of a map, there's really nothing you have better to do than just grind out love points, so it's if you're not playing a ranked run or anything, it's fine. It's never really an issue to get Midir and Aideen to get married. Now, Lana is the weird one in this equation because most of the time she's just going to be a decent healer. You know, she has the same classes as Aideen, so she's going to be able to do warp stuff. She's going to be able to heal, and her magic stat isn't actually all that important. But what is interesting is that if you give her Bloggy Holy Blood, then she can both inherit and use the rescue staff, which is interesting and something that is very fun to play around with, although there are pairings that I think make better use of it. I've never done Claude Lana before. Claude is the person that you have to marry Aideen to get this system to work out. I've never done it before. I think I want to try it this playthrough. I'm either going to marry her to Aideen or Claude. I haven't decided entirely yet, but I'm leaning towards Claude. So we'll see how that works out. And Lester becomes terrible, but he becomes actually a pretty decent mage killer, I think, because he gets really good res and a good res growth. But that's a meme build more than anything. Like, I could not in good conscience argue that Claude Lester is good or even, like, not terrible. He's pretty bad. He's mounted. You can still give him good weapons. He doesn't inherit any, but you can still get them if you just sell them to him. But I'm going to give it a shot this run, I think. The village near your starting position, name drop Sandima. Sandima is the main villain of like this chapter, basically. He's the final boss of the chapter, and we don't meet him until later, but you know, this village gives you a little bit of a picture of what's going on before it's explicitly told to us. It's not that long before we find out anyway, so it's not super important to hear, but you know, it gives you a sneak preview of what's to come, so that's kind of cool. I like it when the game does that. The other village, the one that I've been having Sigurd run down to this whole time, is interesting for one very specific reason. There is a third village, but I didn't even write down what it said, so I don't think it was important. This village that is really hard to get to. I've never gotten it before, actually. I think this is the first playthrough I've ever actually managed to save this village. And the reason for that is because I looked it up, and it said there was nothing good there. There's no items. It just gives you gold. And I was like, alright, whatever. I can live without the gold. It's fine. What it doesn't tell you is that it gives you the lore. It rewards you with lore and story. It essentially gives you Dierdre's backstory. Dierdre is a character that we're going to meet soon and is really, really important to the story. And this gives you some lore and backstory information on her before we actually even meet her, which is neat. I think that's interesting. So that's all I would have said about it if that was all there was to it, but there is more that we will talk about. But just keep this in mind. This village rewards your full tilt Sigurd going all out just to get to this village in time before it gets destroyed with lore. And that's a cool concept. but it is a difficult village to get to, and so the reward should be appropriately valuable. Which at first I thought it was, but turns out to not be the case. We'll talk more about that later. Oh, and side note, and this is something that you'll know if you play the game, but I've always thought it was funny how Do has just like a 6% chance to die. Usually what I have do is visit the village, the middle village, between the first and second castles, the one that I said didn't have anything important to say. So he gets the money there, and most of the enemies pursuing him and Adine cannot hit him when he's on the village, but their leader can, and he has a 6% chance to hit, and he just outright kills Do in one hit. So it's you're playing a little risky there, but if you're auto-saving every turn, you can always just re-roll until he doesn't die, and that's fine. I don't think I've ever lost due to that 6% chance in the few times I've played this game, but it's a possibility. I'm sure there's people out there who have, and if you didn't autosave, oh lordy, I feel bad for you. And then finally, before we move on to the first castle, there's a conversation here between Finn and Quan. It gives Finn some nice stat boosts. I want to say it's like strength, skill, and defense or something like that. But it also characterizes Finn really well. And it kind of shows what he's all about. And you know, I said last time that he only got one line, but that he was going to become one of the best characters in the series eventually. It's kind of from the process of having both generations of this game and FE5 to be a character in. No other character in Yu-Gi-Oh! Gets that much screen time except for maybe like, I don't know, Lewin, maybe? But I don't even think that much. But yeah, Finn in this conversation is really interesting because he shows he expresses loyalty, unwavering loyalty to Quan. And basically says, I will go with you no matter where, no matter what. I will always stay by your side. But he's also down on himself. And it's interesting to see the dynamic here because he basically insults himself and says, like, I'm just a weak knight. I'm not much use to you here. And that in and of itself says a little bit about Finn, how he's kind of down on himself and doesn't really have a whole lot of self-confidence. But it's also an interesting moment for Quan because Quan doesn't deny it. And he basically says, all right, well, if you feel that way, let's just train right now, and that'll help you improve. And I think that that's a really interesting moment for both of them, because it can be interpreted in a couple different ways, or both ways, if you think that both of these are true. But you could say that Quan maybe agrees with Finn a little bit here, and I mean, in the story, I don't know exactly what level of knight Finn is, but Quan did choose him above all his other knights to accompany him. So he's got to be like decent, right? So I don't think that's really it. I think more what's going on here is Quan realizes that that's not how he's going to be able to get through to Finn. Finn, he can't just say like, oh no, Finn, you're really strong, you're really tough. That just won't work. And I think Quan implicitly understands that if he wants to improve Finn's confidence, he's going to have to give him demonstrable reason to improve his self-confidence. So if he's feeling down about being weak, just make it so that he doesn't think he's weak anymore. And, through action. And I think that that's a cool moment. And it's, it says a lot about both of them without saying much at all in terms of the actual dialogue. And it's interesting. I like this conversation a lot. This, I don't want to hold this against the map because it's not the map's fault that I wanted to play this way. I don't think. I think you could argue maybe it is, but I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. But basically, to get this village, I had to send Sigurd all the way down and all the way back up, which took forever. It took a very long time. It was very tedious. And I had to reset a couple times because, like I said, Sigurd died, and that made it take even longer. And that colored my perception of this map a little bit. I'm going to try to not let that influence how I feel about this map because it's already not one of my favorites, but I do think that it's not fair to judge it that way because there's probably a better way to get the village that I just wasn't able to think of. So I don't think it's fair to say that that's how you're meant to experience the map, and I'll give it that benefit of the doubt. But eventually I was able to get Sigurd to go to the first castle, you have to bait Aira away from it, because to recruit Aira, you need to capture the castle without killing her and then talk to her, which is difficult because she guards the castle, and it's really easy to just kill her with Sigurd, or if it's one of your other units, she might just proc Astra and just kill them. Usually what you have to do is you bait her with Alec, who has Nile, which makes it so that she can't proc Astra, and then you just kill the boss and capture with Sigurd. Once you capture this castle, Sigurd meets Shannon, and this is a really interesting moment for Sigurd, because Shannon reveals himself to be the Prince of Isaac, which is, if you remember from the last episode, is the country that Sigurd's country is at war with. He's the prince of that nation. And Sigurd, with no hesitation at all, immediately offers to take him under his wing. Oyfi pipes up here and says, "Hey, shouldn't we tell the king about this if we're gonna harbor the prince of the enemy?" And Sigurd basically shuts down that idea and says, "No, he's a kid. This war has nothing to do with him," and kind of just ends the conversation there. And Oyfi takes a moment to say, "Wow, he's really just such a cool dude," and he is. This is a really cool moment for Sigurd. It's not particularly unique, because I can imagine, I think this is a plot point in FE3 at some point, is that Marth doesn't want to kill the prince and princess of the enemy nation. It's the same thing, right? It does it a game later, but it's still, it's a cool moment for Sigurd, and I think this translation in particular translates it very well. In alternate translations that I've read in this, particularly the transcript on Serenus Forest, which I used to cross-reference all the dialogue to make sure I didn't miss anything, he hesitates a little bit more and doesn't seem as immediately into the idea. So I think I don't know exactly what it's meant to be conveying in Japanese, but the Project Naga translation does a really good job of communicating this is just, Sigurd didn't even have to stop to think about it. He just does it without considering that it might not be the best idea. Cool moment for him. Again, not groundbreaking or anything, but it's cool. This is where we meet Elliot. Elliot shows up after you capture this castle, and just like Eldigan suspected, is going to attack Sigurd's home castle and then move on to invade Granville. Eldigan steps in, and he has a line here which establishes his character very well, which he says, "I don't expect a challenge." He's talking about going out to fight Elliot, and he's telling his knights, "Hey, we're going to go out to do this. I don't expect a challenge." Which, in gameplay, also is true, because he not only is he super strong, his knights have a very low chance of dying. I think a couple of them can die. This run, none of them died for me. They just shit all over Elliot's men. And it establishes his strength really well, which is good, because we're going to be fighting him later, and when we eventually get there, people are going to remember this scene and be like, "Damn," because we have to fight Elliot and his men later, and they're not super difficult, but they're not pushovers. And the fact that Eldigan just demolishes them, we see. You see Sigurd and his army's comparative performance next to Eldigan's, and it really sells how strong Eldigan is, and makes it, all the more intimidating when we do have to fight him eventually. After we capture the first castle, we can recruit Aira, who is this is going to be the hottest take of this podcast. Aira is not a good unit. I'm sorry, guys. She's really good at combat, really good at clearing out the arena, but she's a foot unit. And unlike Azel, I think she has more movement than Azel, so maybe that's not entirely fair, but I was going to say Azel can attack at range, which gives him a little bit more flexibility. She cannot, unless she uses a magic sword, which are bad on her. Although, Azel also promotes into a mount, so, higher reward for your investment there. But if you want to use Aira, that's fine. I'm probably going to use Aira. I like using Aira. She's cool. But, yeah, she's not really super noteworthy, in my opinion, and neither are her kids. Larcy and Ulster are not phenomenal. They can be good. I mean, again, she's good at combat. Her kids are going to be good at combat. It's just a matter of getting them to the enemies. And kind of no matter who you make their dad, their combat is going to be good enough for the arena anyway, so I don't think Aira's husband is the most important in the world, but for the sake of talking about it, I think her best is probably Holland, who's a character we meet later on. It gives, because of the way their holy blood works out, it gives their kids a huge boost to skill, which means that they will proc Astra a lot, and Holland also gives them Luna, which they will proc a lot. If they're using any weapons that have critical on them, then they will be critting constantly, and it's just they will be overkill good at combat. It's absurd the degree to which they will clear out the arena every time. Behind him, I would say it's kind of dependent on what you want. I think that as foot units, they could benefit from Paragon, which is why Lex is a very common dad for them. Not only does he have a conversation that gives him a lot of love points with Aira, he also passes on Paragon, which is really nice for them because they don't have to see as much combat and stay competently leveled. But I think if you want them to be, at their best in combat, I like to pair Aira with one of the sword-using horse units. So I kind of use them interchangeably because I usually only use one or two in a playthrough. Noish, Alec, or Beowulf. So the reason for that is because they will pass Ulster good swords. Basically, if you're using Beowulf a lot, you're going to give him like a silver sword or a brave sword. It's going to have a lot of kills on it. And Ulster wants it. Lex doesn't pass him anything, which is kind of lame. So it's just a matter of whether you want Ulster to have good weapons or if you want both of them to have Paragon. And I think that depending on what you're looking for, both of those are viable options. I don't know who I'm going to pair. I think I'm going to pair with Noish. Noish. I think I decided Noish because he passes them critical and good swords. So, again, they will, even without Holland's Holy Blood in the mix, they will still have a really good skill growth because of Aira's Holy Blood. And that will, they'll be critting a lot, basically, is my thought process behind it, but I don't know how well it'll work out. I've never done it before. Aira herself as a character is fine. I mean, I did establish earlier that she has a good introduction. I like her introduction. I don't remember much else about her other than that she's, she's very protective of Shannon, and she's very intimidating, and people are kind of scared to go up on her head to head. So there's not really a whole lot of depth there, but again, maybe I'll change my mind. I know she's childhood friends with Holland. That has some interesting dialogue there. I think they have a love conversation or whatever. Now, interestingly, there's a conversation here that Quan and Aira have that is optional. You have to trigger it with Quan. Maybe it's Aira, I don't remember. One of them has to initiate it, and I do not think this conversation should have been optional. I think it should have been a part of Sigurd's recruitment dialogue with her, or they should have put it in like somewhere later on in the map. I'll point out specifically where I think it could have been placed later, but the simplest way to integrate it into mandatory story would be the recruitment conversation. I guess her recruitment isn't mandatory, but you're pretty likely to do it, whereas you're not necessarily likely to see this conversation. And I think this is really important because Quan asks Aira, why is Isaac invading Darna, which is the main catalyst for the story up to this point? And to have this relegated to an optional conversation, I don't think makes a whole lot of sense. As for why, it's because Aira says that an independent territory of Isaac acted by themselves without consent, and once the king of Isaac found out about this, he immediately had the guy executed and went to go clear things up with Granvale, but he was assassinated before he could, reach that peace agreement. And Quan says, I don't think that Granvale would do that, and Aira basically says, yeah, I don't think that either, so there's definitely something fishy going on. Aira is the daughter, Aira is the princess of Isaac, in case that wasn't clear earlier, so that's kind of a big deal for her, because that's her dad, Yeah, I think that this should have been mandatory, because I think that it establishes the ultimate reason for the conflict. That's the main conflict that's happening right now is the invasion of Darna. It's the catalyst for the whole story, and the reasoning for it and the implications of the king's assassination were kind of brushed under the rug here. I think you're probably going to get this conversation, but still, it's I don't think it should have been missable. At this point, Du and Aideen have a conversation that's pretty funny. When Jemp freed Du from jail, he said, all right, no more thieving, alright? You have to wash your hands from this for good, and that's the only reason why I agreed to free you. And dude's like, yep. And then in this conversation, he gets a warp staff, and he gives it to Aideen, and he says, hey, I found this warp staff. And she's like, oh, where did you get this? And he's like, I found it on the ground over there. It's very transparently he stole it. But, and it's not explicitly clear whether Aideen believes him or not. I mean, it's kind of implied that she does, but I like to think that she's a little bit too smart for that, but I guess I could be wrong. Warp staff is really nice. I already talked about it a little bit, though. Nothing interesting happens besides that between the first and the second castle. Once you get to the second castle, though, we meet Dierdre, and Sigurd steps in. She's being accosted by a brigand, and, he steps in to put a stop to it, and they basically fall in love at first sight. And it's really cute. It's it's the classic Disney thing, like, the prince and the princess fall in love at first sight, and they're destined to be together or whatever. And the story definitely treats that with a level of scrutiny that I think is interesting. I don't think it really executes it super well, but I think that what they were trying to go for here is cool because, long story short, this moment is the beginning of the end of the world. Basically, because of this moment, the world was thrown into chaos for 15 plus years, and, countless people were murdered. It's a lot. Very bad things came as a result of what happened here. And we'll build more on that later, but it's this is where it started. But basically, Dierdre and Sigurd have a moment, but then she leaves, and the village elder basically tells Sigurd, hey, don't go after her because there's lore that's there. He says village lore. I don't mean the lore of the game is that no, he says that it's foretold in prophecy or whatever that women specifically from the spirit forest, which is where Dierdre is from, cannot be with men. And if someone, if a man were to lay with a maiden of the spirit forest, then calamity would befall the world, etc., etc. And Sigurd says, that's bullshit. I'm gonna go see her again. Which, was his first chance to not end the world, but I guess it's, it's fine. At this point, we meet the king for the first time. We heard about Loptyr in the opening narration, but this is the first time we meet him. Jamk has gone back after saving Aideen, he went back to talk to his dad and try to convince him to stop fighting. But this is where we meet Sandima. And Sandima has been manipulating the king, Grima Wormtongue looking ass from Lord of the Rings, basically convincing him that the war is the right thing to do and that, Granvale was going to invade him anyway, and just basically bullied him into it. And Jamk is trying to fight against it, but Loptyr ultimately sides with Sandima and says, no, listen to Sandima, go fight, and come back victorious. And Jamk's like, fine, whatever. He's not happy about it, but he does it anyway because he's very loyal to his dad. At this point, once Jamk leaves, the king is like, maybe this isn't such a good idea after all, and then Sandima immediately kills him and takes control of the Verdane army under the guise that the king has fallen ill. We get a visit from another guy, another villain introduced here named Manfroy. And Manfroy, if you had to press me for one single main villain of this game, I would say it's Manfroy. I think Julius and Arvis are also, relevant enough to be considered main villains. But if there's one single main villain to this game, it's probably Manfroy, because he's the one pulling the strings from behind the scenes. It's implied that he is the one who assassinated, or at least it was done on his orders, assassinated the King of Isaac. He's the one who's trying to put into effect these plans to raise the Loptyr Empire, which is the big bad guy organization or whatever. It's basically just neo-Nazis. No, I mean that's not true. They are the evil guys essentially, and they want to bring back their evil empire. It's pretty basic stuff. There's some exposition in here about how they were tormented and treated badly, which is something that is built upon a lot in Chapter 7 of this game. And we'll talk about it more there, but there's they don't talk about it much here, so I think it's fine to just gloss over it for now. But there's been some controversy over the Loptyr Empire, and then the game trying to sort of make them obviously not like justified in what they're doing, but try to give them like tragic backstories basically. And I don't think it worked particularly well, but again, another time, another place. They exposit a little bit about their plan, which is basically they want to invade Granville for some reason. I don't know why. I don't think that's ever properly explained, but separate from that, what they're trying to do is essentially find Dierdre, which I mentioned earlier, the village that gives the lore dump about Dierdre's backstory and how it was framed as a reward for being fast and getting to that village. They give it again here, more explicitly this time. They say, Dierdre is the last. They really just give a huge exposition dump about what their plan is here, even though they should both already know the plan. And kind of backpedaling from what I was saying earlier, just again, people do not talk like this. But there could have been so many better ways to put this into the story. They say that Dierdre is the last heir of someone named Sigyn, or she's the daughter of someone named Sigyn, who is the last heir of someone. I don't remember the name of the guy, but he was basically the brother of Gale, the emperor of the Loptyr Empire. Or no, the lore is kind of confusing. I'm sorry, I'm getting all mixed around. Gale was like the first Loptyr emperor, but he had sons, and they were all evil, and they were all possessed by the evil dragon god Loptyr. And one time, one of the emperors had two sons, and one of them was evil and was possessed by the spirit, but one of them was only like a little bit evil. They had like the energy or the blood of the spirit of Loptyr in them, but they weren't evil. And they went away, and they actually, I think they organized the resistance or something like that. It was their influence that ended up costing the Loptyr Empire, their power. And then they went and settled down, presumably in the Spirit Forest, and had some kids, and eventually it led down to Dierdre. And Dierdre has that dormant blood in her as well. And Manfor says, we need to find her. I have the son. We need to find the daughter. And we need to make them fuck. And then once they fuck, they will produce a child who will be the new big bad evil guy. That is their plan. And that is spelled out in explicit detail. And I tried to succinctly summarize it here, and I think I did an alright job because it's explained. It's really just a big lore dump, and was not very well executed in my opinion. So that's their plan, and I think that I mentioned earlier that I think that this kind of invalidates the idea that the lore, or that the village was trying to reward the player for fast gameplay with lore and story. I think that if this was not in the game, or if it came much later in the game, I think that it would have been better. I don't think there's a reason that we need to know this now. I think that it could have been a mystery as to why Sandema was looking for Dierdre. I think it could have been, and with the lore from the village, obviously the player probably would have put it together, right? And then if they didn't get the village or whatever, it could be explained in Gen 2 or something like that, or later in Gen 1, I don't care. But this didn't need to be here. And that's not all. Because there's a third way to get this exact same info dump, and we will talk about that in a minute. I keep saying that, but, it's we're not there yet. At this point, we get to the Spirit Forest, and the Spirit Forest is terrible. Essentially, after you capture the first castle, you have to move through the Spirit Forest, which is a big patch of forested area that all of your units have really bad movement through. And there's more. Not only does it just take forever to get through, but Jamk also shows up, and you can recruit him on the battlefield by talking to him with 18. The problem is, he is really hard to get to because of the Spirit Forest slowing down your movement, and he's really easy to just die against, because he has a lot of skills that let him attack multiple times. He has Adept, he has Pursuit, he has Accost, which are the three, attack again skills, and then all of those hits have a chance to be crits, because he's using a killer bow. And he is one of the most obnoxious recruitments, I don't want to say in Fire Emblem, because you got shit like Xavier and Misha and FE5, but it's up there, for sure. At the very least, it's the worst one in this game. and it's not fun. It's really not. So you really have two choices. You either have to get lucky and hope you position yourself well to recruit him with Adine, or you just have to wait for him to come to you, and neither of those is fun. All of those are terrible. I hate all of them. And then once you recruit him, it's, you just have to trudge your way through. Once Sigurd reaches a certain point, Dierdre shows up and is a playable character now. She says that, hey, I have this silent staff and I can use it against Sandima, because at this point we're fighting Sandima, and he will not be able to use magic anymore. This is really nice because he has a long-range spell that can attack you from very far away. It doesn't have a great hit rate, but it does hit sometimes, and I think it's going to be a 2-shot on pretty much all of your units. And if they're damaged from fighting some of the enemies, it's going to be a 1-shot. And it's a dangerous approach. I actually managed to do this without using the Silent Staff just because I got lucky. I was fully prepared to have to, but I didn't. That was cool. But, it's just not fun. This whole thing, having to slowly trudge your way up, being at the mercy of Sandima's hit rates, it's just not good. It's terrible, terrible game design. And it's why, for a really long time, this chapter was my least favorite in the game. I don't know if it still will be after this retrospective, but it's not good. It's a really, really bad chapter. I should say it's a really, really bad end to this chapter. Otherwise, the chapter was just kind of whatever. Dierdre, as a character, is interesting. She is... I don't want to call her a damsel in distress type, but she basically is. I mean, she's out on the battlefield, she's fighting, and she's not just sitting around doing nothing most of the time. Sigurd does try to protect her, and she kind of steps up and says, no, I want to fight alongside you. And that's cool. That's neat. That characterizes her fairly well. She loves Sigurd a lot, and she wants to protect him. She's all about protecting people. That's her biggest consideration. And she wants to protect Sigurd, so she goes out on the battlefield and fights with him, and that's cool. That's kick-ass. And Fire Emblem has a really, really nice trend of having the female love interests be kick-ass units in their own right. I mean, it's like, Kata or Sita, who's really good also, but then a cool character as well. Lilina is not as good in gameplay, but is still a fun character. Stuff like that. Ninian is a dancer. She's really good for that reason. Gameplay-wise, she's not super great. She's slow. Probably going to get doubled by anything that has pursuit. She gets weighed down a lot by her tome, but most things don't have pursuit, so that's not really a concern. She hits like a truck. Otherwise is not, doesn't really have a whole lot going for her, but she can use staves, that's nice. She passes down, actually no, she doesn't pass down items to Julia, I thought she did. Maybe she does, I don't remember. But yeah, she's fine. She's automatically paired with Sigurd, so you can't change her kids at all. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about her. She's pretty forgettable as a gameplay unit. She's only around for one chapter essentially, so you don't get a whole lot of opportunities to use her, unfortunately. And then, as a last note before we end the map, there's actually two things I wanted to talk about. First of all, Lex gets a Brave Axe here, and it's a fun little reference to I think a Greek myth. I don't remember exactly the origin of the story, but essentially what happens is that he drops his iron axe into the lake, and Spirit shows up and says, hey, did you drop this gold axe or maybe this silver axe? And he says, no, it was just an iron axe. And for his honesty, she rewards him with a Brave Axe, which makes him super good all of a sudden. He was already alright, but now he's good. He's quite good. The Brave Axe makes Lex a behemoth of a unit. He can take down... Not only is he tanky, but he can take down a lot of units without even having to take a counterattack now. Mages were always his kryptonite. Well, actually, I don't even think we could have fought mages up to this point. I don't think there are any magic units except in the arena. But now he might just kill them outright before they even have a chance to attack him, which is super neat. He's good. I like him a lot with this Brave Axe. I liked him before, but now he's even better. And then the other thing before the chapter ends I wanted to go over was the Easter egg, I guess for lack of a better term, that comes if you are able to kill Sandima before recruiting Dierdre. This means that you have to kill him without Sigurd, which is difficult to do, but it is possible. Most of your units will die in 2 shots to his long-range magic, but then when they get close, they have to deal with his short-range magic, which is even more powerful and will sometimes even kill your units in 1 hit. So it's not easy to get this kill without fighting him with Sigurd. But it is doable, and if you do it, then you recruit Dierdre. She gives the same lore dump for the 3rd time. She talks about her origins. She talks about why specifically why the Loptyr cult is after her, and like why she's not allowed to leave the forest. She knows. It's not like she's just unaware of the risk. She knows, and she tells Sigurd, and this is kind of an interesting. Interesting is maybe not the right word. It paints Sigurd in a not great light, to be entirely honest, because the other 2 opportunities to gain this information for the player, one of them is in a village that, while it's most likely going to be Sigurd who visits it, doesn't have to be. And so you can't really reasonably say that Sigurd's going to know it from that village. At least the developers can't assume that people are going to always visit it with Sigurd. The other, obviously, is an NPC conversation happening far away from where Sigurd is, so Sigurd does not have an opportunity to get any of this information, and can therefore, he has plausible deniability for realizing how badly he's fucking the world by fucking Dierdre, so to speak. And that's fine. And I think that there's sort of a tragic element there of he just wanted to be with Dierdre, he wanted to love Dierdre, and it had all these terrible consequences that he could not have seen coming. It's just a tragedy. A dramatic irony is what they call it, when the audience knows something that the characters don't. But with this, there's no excuse. And I know, again, they can't plan around Sigurd knowing this information because it's an optional conversation that's difficult to obtain. But if Sigurd knows exactly what he's getting into here, there's really no excuse for what he's doing. He makes an offhanded comment about how, he prays to God for a second and says, hey, if loving Dierdre is a sin, then I want you to give the punishment for that sin to me alone and not to her. But it's like, dude, you just found out that you could be dooming the whole world. And I get it. He's in love. I don't think he's super old. I think he's older than most Fire Emblem protagonists, but he's still like in his early 20s, I think. So I'm in my early 20s. I can speak from personal experience that people in their early 20s are fucking stupid and horny, and just, I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense for Sigurd's character. I think that people tend to think of Sigurd as like this paragon of like honor and it's such a tragedy that he just couldn't make the right decision because he didn't have all the information. If you get this conversation, Sigurd has all the information and still makes the wrong choice, which is, again, I can't blame people for liking Sigurd. Obviously, I also like Sigurd, and it's not fair to, because not everyone's going to see this conversation, so people are going to have different impressions of Sigurd. But I guess my point here is that this is a really weird thing to leave up to personal experience. This conversation has a huge impact on Sigurd's character, to the point where I think it changes the quality of his entire character, and it's completely optional and more of an Easter egg than anything else. And I don't think that was reasonable. I think that they should have just had it not be in the game, because God knows we didn't need this information given to us a 3rd time. So not only is it patronizing to hear it again, but it also paints Sigurd in a really bad light. There was no benefit to including this in the game. I just don't understand it. Sigurd captures the last castle, and King Bator is still alive but on death's door. He gives Sigurd a very vague warning about the Loptyr cult and then dies. And that's it. That's the end of the chapter. Sigurd muses about it for a little bit, but doesn't really have anything to say about it. Oh, I'm not doing this again. I forgot to talk about Jamk. Woo! Oh man, that would have been embarrassing. Jamk is fine. He's a foot unit, but he's got even more overkill combat than Era. He's so good at combat, especially if you give him good weapons. But even if you just give him like a steel bow, he's gonna kill a lot of things. The problem, just like with Era, is getting him into the fray, and that's just hard to do. So I tend to bench him. I might try to use him this run. I don't think I'm gonna pair him with anyone, but I guess if I was gonna pair him with anyone, it'd probably be Brigid. But I don't really feel like that's necessary. I'm thinking about leaving Brigid unpaired this run because I don't usually play with substitute characters, which are the characters you get if the moms are not married, so they can't have kids. So you get characters in place of who the children would have been. I never do that. I always pair everyone, and I think this might be the run where I don't. I'm thinking about leaving Brigid and Sylvia unpaired and playing with their substitutes. I know that a common trick, I guess for lack of a better term, is to leave Tiltu unpaired because Linda, who is Tinny's substitute, is one of the most fun and interesting ones to play with. Problem is that Tinny is like my favorite character in the whole game, so there's no way I'm not using her this run. I love her. I always love using her. And just as a character, she's really interesting. But I'm getting off topic. Jamk is cool. I like his character. He's very loyal to his father. Even when he is recruited by Aideen, he's not saying like, okay, I will fight with Verdane, or I will fight against Verdane with you. He says to Aideen, listen, I'll go back to the castle to try to convince my father again, but if he doesn't listen, and he still wants me to fight you, I'm gonna do it. I mean, that's not what he says outright, but he says that no one's allowed to touch his father, which by implication, he's gonna fight against them if that's what it comes down to. Aideen's just convinced him to give it another shot. Now, obviously his dad is dead at this point, so there's, he doesn't have to make that decision ever, and he ends up going with Sigurd. He doesn't have a conversation where he says he's gonna go with Sigurd. He's just kind of decided, I guess, that that's what he's gonna do off screen. But Jamp's cool. I kind of like him. He's one of the most interesting characters we have up to this point, not including conversations that we get later. So I think he's fun, and I think that he's a lot of fun to use in gameplay if you can give him the kills that he needs to get levels and, stuff like that. He doesn't have Holy Blood. He's one of the few Gen 1 characters without Holy Blood. None of the, Arden, Noish, and Alec don't have Holy Blood. Finn doesn't have Holy Blood, but I think everyone else we've gotten up to this point has Holy Blood. Dew doesn't. So I guess it's not one of the few. I think it's like half or something. So yeah, I think that this flowed a lot better than last episode because I was talking about the map bit by bit as we went through and talking about both gameplay and story as it became relevant. I think this is how I'm going to do it from now on, unless I find a system I like better. So with that in mind, let us move on to our map gauntlet. Again, map of the week. We only played one map this week, so it's always just going to be whatever map we played. In this case, we played Chapter 1 of Genealogy, so that is our map of the week. Is this map better or worse than Prologue, is the question that we have to ask. And honestly, I think it's a lot worse. I don't think Prologue is a super fun map, but I think it's better than this by quite a big margin. The only interesting part of this map was fighting the first boss, Kinboy, without Sigurd. And that was not, by design. I don't think the game intended for you to do that. I think that was just me running off with Sigurd and having to improvise. And that was fun. That was the most interesting part of this map, and normally the game doesn't even have that much going for it. So, it's just you walk around in a circle. You go down, and then you go left, and then you go up. And the up part is super tedious and annoying and terrible, and I hate it, and everyone hates it. No one likes the Spirit Forest. Even people who like this map probably don't like the Spirit Forest. So I'm pretty confident in saying that this map is not good. I think that at least Prologue has, you have characters joining in different spots. You have things going on. You have the end where you can choke that point. You get that choke point, which is fun. You put Arden there. You put Noish there or whatever. I put Noish there this time. And you just choke that point real good. And choking points is always fun. You can't choke points in this map. I mean, you can choke in the middle of the Spirit Forest, but that's not ideal. Especially with Jamp there, you're gonna want to recruit him, and that's not an ideal position to do it from. So you're probably not going to, and it's Prologue does not have a lot going on, but it has more than this, is the short and long of it. So Prologue is our reigning champ still, and again, spoilers, I don't think that it's going to be dethroned next week either, because Chapter 2 is also pretty bad. But then Chapter 3 gets good again, so we have something to look forward to a couple weeks from now. So that's all that I have for you this time, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next Friday, I guess. That's the vibe I'm going for. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stick to it, but it seems like it's going to be Fridays. So look forward to that. See ya.